I'd like to introduce the judge for the Bedford Poetry Prize, Simon Wrigley. Simon taught English in secondary schools between the years 1973 and 1994, before becoming chair of the National Association of Teachers 2004 to 2006. He advised on English teaching in schools in Bedfordshire and Buckinghamshire between 1994 and 2013. And in 2009, he co-founded and directed a national project for writing teachers, the National Writing Project. He co-wrote Introducing Teachers Writing Groups, published by Routledge in 2015. 2019 to 2021, he is serving on the Young Poets Stories Advisory Board as part of poetry writing development research led by Exeter and Nottingham Trent Universities. He runs a community writing group in Bedford, paints and sells his artwork to raise money for local charities.
Thank you, Liam, for that kind introduction. Why did people turn to poetry in 2021? There were 87 poems submitted anonymously to the Bedford competition. These contained elegies for mothers, fathers, brothers, uncles and aunts. There were also romantic tributes and portraits in acrostics and sonnets. Poems were clearly sacred spaces in which to hold feelings of love and loss. There was also outrage at social injustices. The stories of George Floyd and Sarah Everard resonated deeply this year, as did the plight of the homeless. Poems were platforms for some feisty voices. Although our normal way of life was interrupted by the pandemic, the rhythms of the natural world continued. Unsurprisingly, poets responded with veneration of pigeons, sunsets, misty woods, while others satirized our human foibles, such as our obsession with lawns. Poems were windows to frame our lives. With time to look back and reflect, poets recreated their memories and crafted original expressions of value. I hope the writing was as therapeutic and full of discovery and delight as the reading. Thank you to all those who wrote and submitted their poetry. The poem I have chosen as the winning entry is Peter Chalker's As a Child. It recalls the sensations of childhood, running down alleyways, peeping into gardens, discovering a world beyond the dull safeties of home. On each path, the child tests the boundaries, wall, fence, grass and bramble. Respecting, or literally looking twice at, these materials is part of growing up. This is careful writing, sensitive to sound and syntax, which tests and teaches the reader's attention, just as the child learns the dangers of rushing at an imposing wall and the advantages of taking time to appreciate its secret tactile properties. A wall is not just a hard and painful barrier, but something whose varied surfaces have different temperatures. I could warm my fingertips dragged across the coarse red clay, then cool them in the smooth grey lines of thumb-wide mortar grooves. In the second stanza, the poem reverberates as, with stick in hand, the child finds that the fence becomes a drum roll. The poet uses percussive words to echo this memory. The K's, T's and P's force you to use your teeth, palate and lips to speak the lines. With a clacking stick, tripping across overlapping slats, I'd pass tall timber fences. The child's fingers already know what splinters are, but this time the child finds that with its knot holes, this boundary fence is transparent, allowing secret glimpses of unfamiliar lives. Children's clothes on lines hung by a mother, not mine. In the third stanza, the child crosses the village boundary to where the paths are less defined. With no adult constructions for guidance, the natural world becomes the child's teacher. The long grasses lean in. The bramble both threatens and tempts. And here there are other creatures going about their lives. The ants. Here there is death, the bones of birds. And here there is also adulthood's bewildering debris, litter, things discarded, the disturbing end of innocence realization that adults do not always get things right. It's a sobering realization which takes me back to reconsider, as an adult, how the title, as a child, and the testing of boundaries resonate in today's world. This is a poem which rewards rereading. Other effective and affecting poems stood out for different reasons, such as the haunting personification of the day of my uncle's funeral, the fire of Do You Like Me Yet?, the humour of Auntie Morak, the pathos of The Rub, the symmetries of The Staple in the Thread, the romance of Callanish, and the otherworldliness of The Portal. Thank you for submitting your poems. Please keep writing. Do not be discouraged. The benefits of the writing process, the therapy and discovery it provides, the space it creates for your thoughts and feelings, far outweigh any judgments made by others, such as me. Believe in yourself. Listen to your voice. Develop it by writing.
As a Child by Peter Chalker. As a child, I'd test the borders of the paths I walked. The rough, imposing brickwork of alley walls at speed might graze a passing arm or knee, but slowly walking I could warm my fingertips, dragged across the coarse red clay, then cool them in the smooth grey lines of thumb-wide mortar grooves. With a clacking stick, tripping across overlapping slats, I'd pass tall timber fences, wanting to feel the rhythmic thud with my fingers, but fearing splinters. When I spotted knotholes, I would stop and step close, spying uncanny gardens. Unfamiliar toys discarded in familiar ways, and children's clothes on lines hung by a mother not mine. Paths beyond the village were roughly sketched. The feathers of long grass leaned in to hiss like silk against my shins. The hulking bramble's threat of thorn would curve my steps away, then tempt me back with leaf-lined portals. Proscenium arches over cool, damp hollows, where ants charted their own paths between bird-bone dioramas and adulthood's bewildering debris.
Next, the Bedford Short Story Prize, judged by Guy Russell. Guy was born in Chatham. He's worked as a holiday courier, a purchasing clerk, a media analyst, and a fan heater production operative. He currently works in Milton Keynes for the Open University. His work has been published in a wide variety of publications and journals, including work from No Spider Harm by the Arachne Press, Somewhere This Way by Fiction Desk, Brace by Comma Press, and Northern Stories Volume 3. He has won first prize in several competitions, including the H.E. Bates Award, the Leicester Poetry Society competition, the Ware Sonnet Prize, the Canon Sonnet or Not, and the Flash 500. He occasionally reviews for Tears in the Fence and its blog.
Thanks, Liam, for that nice introduction. I'll just say a few brief words. I was delighted to judge the Bedford Short Story Prize this year, and the 15 eligible stories provided me with several evenings of fascination, insight, general great reading, and admittedly occasional consternation. Locations varied from nearer at home out to the Welsh valleys, the Hebrides, Vietnam, and ancient Phoenicia. Time settings stretched from 500 BC through World War II, past the present day, and on to near futures blighted by totalitarianism or climate crisis. I learned about coal mining, Spitfire manufacture, Mary Sea coal, early post-war Meals on Wheels, and urban street survival. There were bleak tales and bleak moments. In one story, a dead man lay unnoticed all day in a town park. In another, the rescue of a shipwrecked or abandoned child led to unexpected violence. In a third, 2 rebel lovers were killed by government forces in a shootout. But there were lighter ones too. A whimsical story starring a canine comic duo called Harvey and Smudge Meet Mother Nature made me laugh, and another in which parts of a man's body kept falling off painlessly made me smile, albeit a bit bemusedly. Some felt like the openings of novels. Lots of characters, themes, and detailed settings were introduced, and I would have been keen to read on. I sighed at a story of lost love and missed opportunity. I was gripped as a sea angler slipped on and off a cliff edge. And the clever retelling of Jonah and the Whale would, in a world of more medals, have definitely been awarded bronze. So I hope it's become clear that it was great fun reading all the stories. Thanks to the organisers for doing all that unseen and mostly unappreciated slog that makes these things possible. And most of all, thanks to everyone who entered. Of all these stories, though, a couple stood out particularly for me. I really enjoyed Why I No Longer Talk to White People About My Hair, whose opening sentence, "So I'm standing in the post office," dropped me straight into the character as well as the surroundings of the protagonist. Its engaging tone, lively short-tempered narrator, and speedy direct plot meant it came incredibly close to winning. In the end, however, I awarded the prize to Shaken for its fine characterization, subtle touches, and steady plot development. I liked the undercurrents of its dialogue, its unflashy prose, and its attentiveness to the wonder of the ordinary. Here's a quote. "What struck her immediately was the baby's translucence, the sense of her blood just beneath the surface, and below that, her tiny organs toiling away, captivating but terrifying at the same time. I did worry a bit about the story's perhaps too understated ending. In the end, though, I was convinced that the lack of an expected resolution or twist gave force to the presentation of the kind of family disputes that can't easily be settled, and which an over-neat finale would have spoiled. So special congratulations to Monica Hetherington, who seems to me a particularly sensitive and talented writer. And now to the reading of the story.
The thing was, none of them had expected Hilary to get married, let alone have a baby at her age. But then she'd started going out with Ian from her church. They were both converts, as it turned out, so they had that in common. Not that this was a recommendation to Hilary's mother. As she said to Linda with a sniff of displeasure, "They always stick together, don't they? As if they've seen the light and the rest of us haven't. I should never have sent her to that convent school." "Oh, come on, Mum. I think it's lovely that Hilary's found someone at last. You've always said she was too bound up in her work, and now her life's taking a new direction." Trust you to see the bright side. It's all hearts and flowers with you. Marriage is no bed of roses, let me tell you, and to take the plunge at 41 to a man she hardly knows, well, it's asking for trouble. Linda's father looked up briefly from his paper, seemed to consider saying something, met Linda's eye, and thought better of it. She does know him. He's been going to St. Anthony's for nearly a year, apparently. Oh, yes, and sharing the same pew every Sunday as the foundation for a life together, is it? I can think of worse. But her mother didn't rise to that. And why hasn't she brought him home to meet us until recently? Ashamed of us, I expect. She looked at her husband and daughter defiantly. It's no good you denying it. His parents have got money, that's obvious, Derek, and he thinks he's a cut above. You saw the way he looked at our china. Trust him to get the plate with the chip in it. Now you're just being paranoid. Mistake. Paranoid, am I? Well, let's just see who's right, shall we, Miss Cleverclogs? Let's see how things pan out. All right, Anne, give it a rest. We've got the message. And that was how it was left, for then at least. When the wedding album arrived, it was pored over naturally. Linda flicked quickly past the photos featuring herself. The floral crinoline she'd worn as a bridesmaid really hadn't done her any favours, and found that the one she liked best was a full-length shot of Hilary and Ian by the rolls. It had been a sunny day with a playful light wind, so Hilary was holding her veil down with one hand, her other resting in Ian's. She was gazing at him with a smile of, what? Contentment? Triumph? True, her mouth was closed, almost pursed, where you might have expected parted lips, but then she always had been a bit self-conscious about her teeth. Not so Ian, who was grinning straight to camera with his limpid, dark-fringed eyes, hair raffishly ruffled by the breeze. The happy couple. Looking at the only group photograph in the collection, Linda could read the tension in the angle of her mother's head, adorned by its improbable hat, and in her father's awkward stance, unaccustomed as he was to morning dress. Ian's parents, Annabel and Henry, on the other hand, had the confident, proprietorial air of the people who had paid for this show and who knew how things should be done. Or that was how her mother saw it, she knew. Oh, I didn't know where to put myself when your father agreed to it. They could give them a better send-off than we could afford, was his argument to me afterwards. But it didn't feel right, Linda. Well, it was a lovely send-off, Mum, and that's the main thing, isn't it? Oh, don't get me wrong, it was all done very nicely. Why, we had to have 5 courses for lunch. And I know it wasn't down to them, but I thought the service would never end. Talk about bells and smells. But no, I've got to hand it to them. It was all very tasteful. And Hilary did look lovely, didn't she? Safe ground here. Oh, yes, that dress was an inspired choice, so elegant and understated, just right for a bride of a certain age. Well, we couldn't have her mutton dressed as lamb now, could we? And just for a moment they shared a conspiratorial giggle. When Linda was home for Christmas, all the talk was of Hilary's pregnancy, of course. Well, they didn't waste much time, did they? What were they thinking of? She's more than getting on to be having a first baby. I shouldn't worry, Mum. I'm sure she'll be well looked after. The system's geared up for older women these days. Yes, but what does she know about bringing up a baby? I wish she lived closer so we could keep an eye. She'll need plenty of help when the time comes. So, when the time came, it had all been arranged. Linda's exams would be over by then, so she was to go and stay the first week, and then her mother would take over for as long as I'm needed. It was a glorious late June day when Linda had her first sight of Marie Claire, asleep in her Silver Cross pram under the apple tree. What struck her immediately was the baby's translucence, the sense of her blood just beneath the surface, and below that, her tiny organs toiling away, captivating but terrifying at the same time. She's gorgeous. Hills, you clever thing, you. I can't quite believe she's mine yet. Annabelle says she's the image of Ian when he was newborn. Oh, I don't know. I can never see it when people say babies take after Aunt Lil or whoever. She's just her own lovely self. Hilary shot her a grateful look. Let's have a cup of tea before she wakes up and wants another feed. You sit still, I'll do it. That's what I'm here for. When Linda came out with the tray, Hilary had dozed off. She looked done in, grey half-moons under her eyes, hair in a straggling bun, and a thrown-on look to her maternity dress, bulging with her still round belly. Although Linda put the tray down quietly, Hilary startled awake. Oh, what time is it? Nearly 5. Ian will be in soon. He always gets home early on a Friday. Could you keep an eye on her while I go and make myself presentable? OK. I'll make a start on the salad and watch out through the kitchen window. Which is what she was doing when Ian bounded in, tiggerish as usual, and gave her an unabashed hug. How's my favourite sister-in-law? Ravishing as always. And what's this we're having? Salad niçoise. Yum. This is so good of you, you know. My pleasure. Oh, and here's Mummy. How are you, darling? Had a good day? Come and sit down. How about a nice glass of wine? I'm going to. I'd better not. I don't want it coming out in the milk. Oh, don't be silly, darling. A little drop won't do any harm, will it, Lindy Lou? Really, Ian, no. Please yourself, but Lindy will, won't you? With a knowing wink. But just then, Linda noticed the pram begin to shake and went out, Hilary beside her, to pick up her niece for the first time. The rest of the week was something of a blur, a dizzying round for them both of cleaning, cooking, feeding and nappy changing, interspersed with the occasional interval of peace when Marie Claire slumbered and the sisters slumped on the sofa, listening out half guiltily for the baby's next announcement of her presence. Not that she was a difficult baby, just unpredictable. So far she hadn't settled into any reassuring pattern of behaviour, so it did rather feel as if they were at the beck and call of a tiny, incomprehensible tyrant. And for Hilary, of course, the demands didn't stop at night. Ian does offer to help, but I don't like to get him up. He's got work in the morning, so he needs his sleep. Like a bear with a sore head without it. She smiled ruefully. This is my job, really, isn't it? You could always wake me. Oh, no, you're doing enough already. And there really wouldn't be anything for you to do anyway. It's a one-woman job, breastfeeding. I'm getting to be a dab hand at changing her. But Linda didn't press the point. And when her parents arrived on the Saturday to pick her up and drop her mother off, she wasn't entirely sorry. Well, love, she's a bobby dazzler, her father said, peering into the pram. But you look absolutely bushed, Hilary. Are you getting enough sleep? Linda's been brilliant, Mum. She's taken all the cooking and cleaning off me so I can concentrate on the baby. So I should help. You can't have you worn to a frazzle. It isn't easy, I know, but I'm here now, so we'll see what we can do to get you into a nice routine, young lady, swooping down to pick up her granddaughter. Steady on there, Anne. I just got her settled. She loves her old dad, don't you, precious? And Ian moved as if to reclaim her. Oh, a daddy's girl, is she? But she's not going to rule the roost. Make a rod for your own back if you let her. Before Ian could reply, Linda's father said, Any chance of a cup of tea before we head off back? Mustn't leave it too late. Oh, of course, Derek. What am I thinking of? I'll do it. And Linda's mother made to hand the baby over. But Ian was already heading off inside, pausing only to turn and say, No, Anne, you'd better carry on getting acquainted with our little monster, hadn't you? I can at least make a cup of tea, flashing his teeth at her. As she and her father were about to leave an hour or so later, Linda hugged her sister tightly and wasn't entirely surprised to see her eyes glittering with tears. We did all right for a couple of novices, didn't we? Of course, Hills, you're doing great, all of you. They always say the first few weeks are the hardest. You take care now. One final parting squeeze, and they were off. It must have been about 9 o'clock on the Monday evening that the phone went. Linda? Sotto voce. Oh, Linda, thank God. Mum, whatever's the matter? You've got to come and get me. Please come and get me right now. Why? What's happened? It's Ian. He shook me, Linda. He got hold of my arms and manhandled me and shook me. Please come and get me, all right? I don't know. OK, slow down. I'm having a job getting my head round this. Whatever would make Ian do a thing like that? I can't go into it all now. Just please, Linda, get in the car and come. Look, Mum, I can't. I've had some wine with my supper and I'm well over the limit. Oh, well, that's just typical. Getting louder now. Why does your dad have to be away? He'd have come like a shot. I'm sorry, Mum. I'll come really early tomorrow morning, I promise. Can I talk to Hilary? No, you can't. You want their version of the story, I suppose. Don't you start trying to blame me. I might have known you'd be on their side. Deep breath. I'm not on anyone's side, Mum. I'll talk to Hills tomorrow when I come. What are you going to do now? I don't have much choice, do I? Oh, I'll stay in my bedroom and wait for you to come. No sleep for me tonight. Oh, God. And she started to sob. It was Hilary who opened the door the following morning. Hills, what on earth is going on? Shh, come into the kitchen. Marie-Claire lay there in her caricot on the floor, snuffling in that way she had when she was starting to wake up. Has Ian gone to work? He didn't want to, but I said it would be better for him to be out of the way, and he didn't argue. But what happened? I know Mum can be a pain in the backside sometimes, but surely... Linda, is that you? Hilary blanched at her mother's querulous voice from upstairs. Look, I'd better go to her. You stay here. When Linda got into the hall, her mother was halfway down the stairs, struggling with her case. Give that to me, Mum. As she took it, she registered with a jolt how shrunken her mother suddenly appeared, and how greasy pale her skin. Are there any other bags to come? Wordlessly, her mother gestured to a holdall and her handbag at the top of the stairs. As Linda brought them down, she said, I'll just put these in the car, and then how about we sit down quietly with Hills and talk this over? Her mother looked at her wearily. I just want to go home, Linda. There's no point. Just at that moment, Hilary appeared. Mum, please, don't go like this. Her voice was ragged, fluttering with the effort to keep it under control. Don't you go toiling on the waterworks, with a flash of her usual spirit. This is how I'm going. What did you expect? And you can tell that husband of yours. I don't want to hear it, her voice beginning to rise. I don't want to hear it. I just want some peace and quiet. And as if on cue, the baby started to cry, her voice and Hilary's merging into one indistinguishable wail. The journey home seemed interminable. There'd been an accident on the motorway, so they sat and broiled in traffic for nigh on 2 hours before they could get moving again. Mercifully, Linda's mother dozed most of the way, waking only when Linda stopped for a loo break. She was persuaded to get out and accompany her, complaining half-heartedly about the state of the toilets and refusing the offer of a drink. They don't know how to make a decent brew in these places. Linda had never been so glad to round the corner of Spencer Avenue and open the front door of her parents' semi. It felt cool inside, and she shivered as her mother went straight to the living room, lay down on the daybed and closed her eyes. Shall I make some tea, Mum? That would be nice, thank you. And when she sat up to drink it, some of her usual colour had returned. Do you want to talk about it? Don't feel you have to, but it might help. I didn't like leaving them there, Linda, but what else could we do? What do you mean? Well, he's dangerous, isn't he? Lashing out like that. I only said... But then she stopped, bit her lip. Said what? I can't remember. I've had a shock. Of course you have. Let's wait until Dad gets home tomorrow. Why don't you go upstairs and have a proper lie down? I'll make us some scrambled eggs later, shall I? You're a good girl, Linda. What would I do without you? After her mother had gone up, Linda sat quietly, leaning back and letting her eyes drift around the familiar room. The wedding album lay on the shelf under the TV. She pulled it out and started turning the laminated pages, stopping at the one of Hilary and Ian by the car and touching it gently with her finger. Outside, the leaves on the rowan tree in the front garden trembled and brushed against the window with a faint, insidious scratch. Suddenly, on an impulse, she was up, opening the door of the cupboard under the bookshelves, shoving the album inside and turning the key on it. She paused for a moment, shaking her head as if to dislodge something, and then went through to the kitchen to see if there were enough eggs for supper.
First of all, I'd like to say how surprised and delighted I am to have won the Bedford Short Story Prize. And I'd like to thank Guy Russell for reading all the submissions, which must have taken a lot of work. And I shall be fascinated to hear what it was specifically that he thought about Shaken. When you put your work out there, getting feedback is immensely valuable and helpful. Shaken was originally written in 2016 as the end of module assessment for a creative writing module that I did for the Open University. All the pieces that I'd done up to that point, including some poetry and some life writing, as well as prose fiction, had been much shorter. So I was challenging myself really to produce something with more characters, 6 characters, if you count the baby, and also something that was extended over a longer time span than any of the stories that I'd written up to that point. So where do the bones of the story come from? I think I'll just say that the events that are described in the story are loosely based on family events relatively close to home. And what I wanted to do in writing about these events was to explore a family dynamic. After all, we all come from families, don't we? It's where we all come from. We're all aware of the tensions and difficulties and crises that can arise from living in close proximity with other people. The structure of the story was partly determined really by the fact that I had 3,000 words to play with. So given that I was trying to write something which was spanning about a year, I had to choose very carefully a number of short scenes that were going to enable me to focus in a telling way on the characters, the way that they developed, the way that they interacted, so that that would lead, believably, I hoped, to the climactic event in the story. I also had to make a decision about the narrative voice. And first of all, I thought, well, I'll take the omniscient narrator line, but I very quickly realized that that wasn't going to work because there were certain events in the story as it unfolded that I knew I wasn't actually going to depict, that I wanted to leave open, uncertain. I know that that's not necessarily everybody's cup of tea. People often like things to be resolved, and this story isn't really resolved in any significant way at the end either. But it seems to me that life is muddled, complicated, confusing, and that fiction, or sort of fiction that I like reading, or some of the fiction that I like reading, honours that reality, that aspect of human experience. I suppose it would be fair to say that there was just one aspect of the piece that that was meant to sort of pull it together, a sort of motif, and that is the wedding album, which appears at the beginning of the story, or near the beginning of the story, and again at the end. This is the English teacher in me, I'm afraid. I think this came from a poem that I was very familiar with, taught for many years, called Afternoons by Philip Larkin. Comes from his collection, Wits and Weddings. And copy falls open at that page. The poem refers to the albums lettered Our Wedding lying near the television. Lying, of course, is ambiguous there. And at the end of the story, when Linda shoves the album away out of sight, I suppose I was trying to suggest something about how she fears that the story that the album tells about the happy couple, about their fulfillment and happiness of their future, could be a lie. But ultimately, of course, it's up to the reader to ask themselves questions about what happened between Anne, the mother-in-law, Linda's mother, and Ian, her son-in-law. It's for the reader to decide. I hope that those of you who read it will enjoy it. Thank you.